I'm here with Siobhan, who is going, and I'm teasing her about what causes that. Uh, and I'm sure it's allergies or dust or something like that.
Dust, you guys. That's what it is.
So I'm truly having fun with her. Um, so it's it's officially as we record this January 29th.
Yes.
Okay, and from where I sit, it looks like spring market is kind of like starting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I,
what I was going to say is, as you talk to your clients, either buyers or sellers, what are you saying about this spring market in particular?
great question. I think when we get really up and running, it'll be similar to last year. Rates are expected to dip a little bit, which is probably going to bump prices up and competition up a little bit. So I think we're going to see some heated competition for properties that are priced right. But I do think the market is still going to be price sensitive in the from the perspective of, rates at 2.5 or 3.5%. The feeling, not the reality, but the feeling is, oh, this is free money, right? Even if rates go, 8, 7, 6, 6.5, something like that, it still doesn't feel like free money, right? So there's going to be some price stabilization, I think, as a result. But I do see more inventory coming on. So I'm telling my buyers now is really the time to be looking, even if you end up with something at a slightly higher rate. The prices are the most stabilized I expect them to be through the season. So you could buy now at this rate and then refinance down the road should rates go down, but at least you'll be locked into your price, rather than having rates go down a little bit and then you are facing more competition and you have to outbid the next person to win. You may end up paying more in the end, than if you would just purchase at a higher rate. So that's what I'm talking to my buyers about. My sellers, it kind of depends. So we do have some properties we've listed just recently. Um, there are others though that we're holding because, for example, I have a condo in Clinton coming up. Um, Beautiful spot if anybody knows anybody. And the market there is just a little slower to react, right? So Shrewsbury, the boroughs, Worcester, those tend to heat up first. And then you see the secondary overflow into surrounding areas. So for them, it's not as advantageous to list just yet until the market heats up just a little bit more. So we want to be on the early side of the curve, but we want to time it kind of just right.
So, if you look at your business, and this is a question you may or may not know the answer to, well, how does your business break down buying to selling?
Um, Definitely, it depends. My favorite answer. At the moment, I want to say I'm probably two-thirds buyer, one-third listing.
And for
Last,
my business, I'd flip that 2/3
yep,
with the sellers and a third buying.
yep. I like to work with buyer. I mean, I like to work with everybody. I know a lot of many agents or brokers or whomever will tell you, well, I only want the listing. I only want the listing. I enjoy working with the buyers, and I enjoy most of all having exposure to continuous exposure to all sides of the transaction because I think it makes me more, sympathetic and more informed. So when I'm having the conversation with sellers, I can say, well, I can tell you with high confidence, this is what buyers think and feel and are saying, and vice versa. So,
Yeah.
Mr. Buyer, this is how your offer is likely to be received. If I were representing the selling party, this is how I would be advising them. So those are just things to consider in the negotiation process.
Yeah, I tend to prefer the seller side more.
Yeah.
And for me, it has to do with my innate frustration coming from engineering that if I show a house that checks every box
Mm.
and they say, yeah, no, I get that buying a house is a visceral experience. I get that it's either in your gut or it's not. I get that when you walk in and you smell the house, that if you don't like the way it smells, if it's not a scent that you like, I always say, does it smell like your grandmother's house? Because if it just smells old, that's probably wallpaper. That could be done.
Right, right, right.
But it's frustrating to me to have a house that checks every box and then to have someone say, yeah, it's not right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's their money. It's their purchase. Of
Right,
course, that's fair.
right. Yeah, I think I'm fairly literal too. So especially when I first started, I was but like, what are we talking about here? Like, I just gave you, especially when I'm excited, right? I'm like, I found the one.
Right.
It checks everything. And then they're not excited about it, and I'm excited about it. I'm like, wait a second now.
Right.
Um, so now I really lean into the skid, so to speak. So I will tell new buyers, I'll say, this is actually something that I use to get them to cast a wider net. So a lot of times buyers will come to me and they'll say, this is exactly what I want. And then I try to tell them, you could find a place that matches all of these criteria and you walk in it and you're like, you know what? This just doesn't feel like home to me. Well, and people can usually kind of digest that part of it, right? And then I'll say, and vice versa, a house that maybe doesn't check all your boxes might have exactly the right feeling and you're willing to overlook it because it checks enough and it feels like home to you. So let's cast a wide net. Let's be very open-minded and flexible. Let's see as much as we can because through that process we're really going to winnow down on these are the things that really matter to me, which might be different than what you think when you start out.
I find it interesting to go into a house and look around and say, no, this is not the house, and then have them say, we love it. What do we have to do to get it?
Yes. So one of my very first lessons in agency, just across the board, was talk less, listen more. Because there were a couple times I put my foot in it where I'd walk in and I was like, oh, ooh, look at, like, not you. I would never said you, but, I would sort of point out, like, oh, I don't know if this is, kind of the right thing. And to your point, they loved it, thought it was the best thing ever. And so that really highlighted for me, like, it's not your purchase. You just hush. That's not what you're there for, right? So it is funny, though. It's definitely funny.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on and talking about what you're telling people in the spring market.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks,
Thanks.
everybody.